Hey, everybody.
Hello, 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 beautiful people in Dayton, Ohio.
So, I saw a few of y'all asleep. So
I
that's
know,
not
it's time
going
to wake up.
that's not
We
going to
see the
happen.
guys over here, they're partying over here. We got parties over here. It's time to wake up for this session, right?
Yes.
Wake and bake. I'm just playing.
So, we'll go ahead and get started. As Audrey said, I'm Te'Jal Cartwright. I'm going to pull it down a little bit because I heard the echo kind of coming. But my name is Te'Jal Cartwright. I am the executive producer and host of a platform called What's the Biz with TJ. We highlight the stories of black business owners and really just want to build the black economy.
Absolutely, and it's an honor to be sitting with you, Miss Te'Jal, right?
Thank you.
I am Nickole Ross, and I am the owner, co-founder, and COO of Neura Labs, a medical marijuana processing facility located here in Dayton, Ohio, where we'll be producing medical marijuana products for patients here in the program, in Ohio's medical marijuana control program. So it's a pleasure to be speaking here with you tonight, and I look forward to sharing these conversations with you also. I'm ready.
Perfect. So, if you guys did not read the schedule, today we'll be talking about the cannabis industry and its effect on, the black community and how black people or anyone who's interested in getting involved in the cannabis industry can get involved. But we'll definitely be talking about some historical and present and future ways to kind of change the cannabis industry and make it equitable for everyone.
Absolutely. Inclusion. That's what we're talking about today. You know, it's really important for that conversation to take place because that's the only way we're going to be able to move anything forward is by having the right conversations about inclusion. So,
Yes. So first off, we're going to start with Nicole. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your story? How did you get involved in the cannabis industry? It's so new.
so I got involved in the cannabis industry back in 2013. Where I was the co-founder and also marketing director for Elevation VIP, a medical marijuana edibles and fusion company located in Los Angeles, California. Before getting my involvement, being from Dayton, Ohio myself, I never used cannabis as a medicine growing up. So it wasn't really in my environment, it wasn't really in my home. So when I moved to California, I was really opened to the opportunity to see cannabis in a new light. Cannabis has such a culture in California and on the West Coast that you really can't get around not seeing cannabis somewhere. So when I lived in Los Angeles to pursue music, it was one of the things that was kind of in the background always in the music industry, but it was something that still had such a big stigma that was associated with it, even with it being some adult use market in California. But at the time, it wasn't adult use, it was just still a medical program. So I met a friend who I would do dinner collectives with in California, who was interested in infusing foods with cannabis, but what she was doing was making brownies. And at that time,
Yeah.
brownies is what everybody used to, little old mama recipe, put it in there, whip it up. But it was one of the things that when I tasted it, I had fears at first because I've always heard real big issues with consuming cannabis in smaller doses, microdosing, but not consuming it all because if you overconsume, you can have, some unfavorable experiences. But when I had the brownie, I ate the entire thing. And I was just like, okay, now let me experience this ride. And at that moment, that's when I recognized like we should change how people look at food and cannabis versus looking at cannabis separate from food as medicine, but medicine as food and cannabis as food. So we decided to infuse foods with cannabis. So we did a lot of different programs. We did Spotify. We did some other events that we would host for patients in California. And then it brought an opportunity for us to look into partnering with a cannabis company for a cannabis restaurant at that time. So, quick story, fast forward around, I moved to Ohio, back home to Ohio during that whole process. That's where I had ended up having my beautiful daughter and was able to be more stationary here in Dayton, Ohio.
What year was this? Let me get a picture.
2015.
Okay, got it.
So 2015, I came back to Dayton, Ohio, but was still doing all the marketing and the branding for Elevation. And during that time, back in 2017, that's when we got involved into writing the application here in the state of Ohio for the medical marijuana control program, while I was actually working with Chef Andrea Drummer out in California for the marketing for Elevation VIP. So just kind of went into a full circle where we were actually infusing edibles just with our own butters in the home. Now we have an opportunity to take that small dosage that we used to do in our kitchen and now produce it mass for patients here in the state of Ohio. So it kind of went full circle. My family wasn't really involved in the process, but at the time, they were involved by investing in me to be able to go and actually start the company Elevation VIP with Chef Andrea.
So I definitely want to highlight that Nora Labs is family owned, and it's so dope to just see, you know, how your parents really trust you, you know, with the business, and they trust your idea. I was really shocked when you said that your parents weren't involved in cannabis at all, and you just came home like, I got an idea.
I did. My mom, when I told her I was infusing foods, and I told her with cannabis, she's like, you're putting weed in people's foods? I'm like, yes, I am. So it was a shift because, again, the paradigm of being at home and not being exposed to cannabis at a young age really didn't translate from medicine at that time. At that point of time, that's when I was able to do a lot more research and really have an understanding of what cannabis is, not just from a leisure use, but from a medicine perspective. And that's when that education from me being able to explore coming home and having that conversation with my family about cannabis and how it impacted my life started the whole process of us connecting together here in Ohio.
You talk about cannabis so loosely, and of course the vibe and the culture is different in California than here in Ohio. Ohio is years and years behind. But did you ever feel a stigma with cannabis, or even talking to your parents, or even starting Nora Labs?
There was a stigma just a bit, just because of the lack of education, you know, the ignorance to understanding what cannabis really is as a medicine versus using it as a drug, because it's still federally illegal to be a part of this program, but that's why each state has a governing body that allows for cannabis to be used. One of the things that was a challenge is because in most underrepresented communities, the war on drug was a very big impact. So cannabis isn't something that we most seen. It's kind of like twofold. There's some families and some environments that cannabis is heavily used, and there's some families that just it was not. And my family just was not used to seeing cannabis involved in our experience. So when I brought it home, it was more education that I had to really started to involve myself with, and started to utilize the science side of cannabis versus just the understanding that cannabis is something that people are just doing. My mother would always say changing somatics to science is because right now we're going to the fact of when you see cannabis, you're understanding the cannabinoids that's involved in cannabis. You're understanding the terpenes that's involved just outside of cannabis itself from the THC component. So now that I have a very fluent group of women who's in my life right now who are nurses, they're starting to get openly involved in understanding the science behind cannabis. And that's what we want to really do, is help change the education piece, because it's important for us to change the stigma in order for us to get to the education. So,
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the history between, you know, cannabis and the Black community, and just even like when other cultures use it, it's looked at as fun, and you kind of think of the 70s, I think, or like, you know, but then when it's us, we're thinking about incarceration and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of bad history, but I like your perspective of like changing that, and instead of just looking at it for consumption, figuring out, you know, learning what you're intaking and all this other stuff. So what else can you do besides have it for leisure?
I mean, cannabis can be used in many facets. That's the beautiful thing about it, because it can be used from its roots all the way into the flower itself. One of the things about cannabis that I'm trying to change the word and not call it marijuana or call it weed, because those are the things that people are so used to using in the terminology of cannabis itself, because cannabis is such a multidimensional plant that can be used in so many different ways. It could be used in textiles. It could be used as plastic. A good friend of mine just sent me an article that Legos is about to start making hemp cannabis Legos, you know, because
Ooh.
it could be used for plastic. And
Keep
that's
the
just,
toys out your
and
kids'
sustainability for children. Well, it won't be anything kids can eat on and do anything to, but using cannabis as a way to change the systems as far as how it affects our environment from plastics. Now you can use a plant and you turn it into plastic, so it can be sustainable for our earth and biodegradable and things like that. So cannabis has an impact in so many different ways. We're just starting to now get to the R&D and to the research on how we can start utilizing it in our everyday life from a whole being perspective.
So a big part of the reason why people probably aren't getting in the industry is, you know, you have to have a clean record to kind of do a lot of the things with the cannabis. What are some things that Nora Labs is doing can you talk about some of that work that you're doing to help communities?
Absolutely. One of the things that is important for us in our agenda is to really serve underrepresented communities. Serving underrepresented communities because we have been so affected based off of the war on drugs, meaning that our participation is more important now than it was back then, because now it's about the representation that we need to see for minorities of Black and brown people, women, veterans, indigenous people. We all need to be able to have a place to be able to move through. With the war on drugs, it changed a lot of the way we have to go into communities and be able to support each other when it comes down to the education. Again, you're going to hear me talk about a lot of education, because the education is going to be what we take the understanding of cannabis and be able to evolve it as we move forward, because patients want to be able to see this plant help them thrive. You know, there's children who depend on cannabis for their well-being. There's people who have very bad chronic illnesses that need to be supported. And if we're looking at cannabis only for one community, it's not serving us all. So right now, serving underrepresented communities is our main goal. So expunging records so people have a fresh start. I'm working with partners in the community like Tasha Roundtree. I got some other partners here doing some containerization and shipping containers, and also people who are advocating from the education and patient well-being with Ali Reeves and Kamo, who are also helping us really push forward to the agenda of making sure that people have a good start going forward. And also my family. My family has a very big, my family and my team. Our team is very well diverse in different industries, and we want to be able to make sure that we have an imprint in the community by showing our faces and showing up as we stand together in solidarity to make sure the changes are necessary. So expunging records is one of the things, because if you can't have a clean record, you can't work for me. I am a state-governed license holder, so people in the state program have to go through BCI background checks. So if there's communities that have been heavily influenced and affected by cannabis, they can't even get a job from what I'm doing. So that's important for us to understand, is that these fresh starts not just start in the workforce, but also starts at home. So if you have cannabis on your record, or if you're a patient in the program and you're in federal housing and you get caught, you can get kicked out of your home just by being a patient in a federal program. So those are things that we have to be able to still, again, educate each other on, just do things like expungement clinics to change the records and making sure people have a fresh start so they can have a better buy-in in the future for cannabis. Okay.
So let's get back into the process of starting a business in the cannabis industry. I'm someone that wants to get started. What kind of advice would you have for me? Like, what kind of things have you overcome as a Black business owner in the cannabis industry?
This is a deep question. The first thing was to have faith in myself, you know, and having the support and the faith of the people who have supported us through this process. God is one of the main component of this whole process, and as Nora in Aramaic means light of God, and one of the things that we wanted to do collectively was shine a light on the various of issues, not issues that just affect us and our community directly, but issues of wellness, from medicine to financial wellness, spiritual wellness, physical wellness, and just being able to have a support system. One of the things about being in business is that you have to be able to know that there's going to be challenges, you know, and one of the things that I've been saying to myself out loud is you can't lead if you can't learn. Because learning is one of the key processes to being a part of this cannabis program, just because there's so many restrictions and regulations when it comes down to being involved in cannabis. one being it's a federally illegal drug. So still to this day, I can be affected by it being a federally illegal drug. But with state programs like Ohio, that gives me the advantage to be able to be inside of the program and understanding what's taking place, so then we can carve the correct and the proper pathways for other minorities and other owners who want to come into the space. Some of the challenges is being able to get past just having the financial responsibility to be a part of the cannabis program. Most people think about investment as, okay, I got $10,000 or I got $15,000, which is a lot of money for a lot of people. But in cannabis, your minimum buy-in can be $150,000 in just liquid cash that you have to apply for the application that's non-refundable, that you have to have a property that's already located and properly zoned, and then that you have to have the capital to sustain. So one of the issues, if you don't have the liquidity to show that you have 500,000 millions of dollars to be able to operate a business, you can't participate in the cannabis program. And a lot of underrepresented communities don't have the financial wherewithal to be able to know that they can be supported because, again, federally illegal, no banking, means I can't get a loan from nobody because of this issue of cannabis being on the scheduled list for a drug. So once we get some laws changed, it's really important that we have people who stand together to actually make sure policies get looked at, because the policies is what's going to take place for us to have a pathway for success. So the capital, and also too, another big issue is making sure that if you're going to start in this industry that you have a lot of knowledge before you go inside of it. I spend a lot of time educating a lot of people about just the basic things about cannabis, from the cannabinoids to the terpenes. But if you want to get invested into the cannabis, it's best to be invested with those who are there, because they are the ones who have the information and also the guidance, the template for us to be successful as we move forward together. Because one thing I recognize, if there's one body and there's 50 that you're going against, I'm not as strong if I have just one of me, but if I have a collective of people collectively building and working together, that collective is more stronger as we have the endurance to be able to move through this program as it starts to evolve here in Ohio.
Who have you connected with outside of your family, and how?
So our community, our family, I look at my family as our community, because one of the things that we did, we raised over $2.5 million through our family and friends. And that's not an easy feat, being a minority-owned company and just in general, because the thing is, you got to be able to have people believe in your vision.
Wait, what number did you say again?
Over $2.5 million.
Okay, okay. I'm like, okay, did I hear that right?
Yeah, it has a few zeros behind it, but those zeros are those zeros from the community. And so when I look down having a partner, you know, one thing I learned in being in business is not all good money. Not all money is good money. But the thing that I see in our money that has been invested in our community is good money, because it's the people who worked so hard to be able to see us move forward in this moment. One thing we sit down with VCs, which is not a bad thing to sit down with VCs, but when you're when you're an entrepreneur, you have to protect your assets. You know, you have to protect your ownership. And one of the things that we don't want to do is turn over our ownership just because we don't have the capital support, or just because we don't have the proper people in position to run an organization, because we have all those pieces. Now we need to have the support to be able to see us through so we can have sustainability. And that's being able to know that our community has our back, and the people that we bring in that maybe be VCs are aligned to our mission, because it's our mission to be able to make sure that we have ownership in minority communities and underrepresented communities, so we can continue to build on an inclusive and diverse industry.
Okay, I like that. That's awesome. I think that the thing that I'm really baffled about is just how you can't even bank under Nora Labs because it's not federally legal. Like, that's really crazy. And so your only option to get access to capital is crowd fundraising or crowd raising. What does that process look like for anyone that's interested, again, in getting in this industry?
Education. One of the things that, again, because let me be real, we have some in our underrepresented community, some lack in financial literacy. to be able to understand what it really means to understand investing. And it's no fault of everybody's, it's just where we are in a point of time of how we learn. So one of the things that's important with financial literacy is understanding what does an investment mean, what does equity mean, what is understanding how to do a loan that's going to be appropriate in this industry, because there are ways to be able to purchase things in the cannabis industry, but those are ancillary. So I can buy an extraction piece of an equipment through financing, because extraction equipment doesn't just serve cannabis, it can serve multitudes of industries. So those are ways that you can still help support yourself in the cannabis industry without going completely in the negative, but it still requires a very large capital responsibility. Our equipment costs, our cheapest equipment costs $100,000. That's just some of the natural costs that you're going to see in the industry, just because of the magnitude of what this industry creates in the program that is being done in. So,
yes, education. That's the word for this. Educate. I like that. So when we think about the cannabis industry, or when I did before our conversations, my mind just automatically went to growing. But there's so many different ways to get involved in this industry. Can you talk about or name some of them, just for kicks?
Okay, so there's the direct plant touching avenue, which what I am involved in the process. So in the state of Ohio, there are 3 parts that are directly related to the cannabis industry, and the 4th part that's a testing. The first 3 parts are your growing, which you have a level 1 or level 2 operator that can grow anywhere from as minimum as 3,000 square feet to maximum 25 in the program to date, but then they have the bandwidth to be able to expand to 75,000 square feet. Then you have the second tier, or the second group, which is the processing. So we take what has been cultivated from a cultivator, and we process it. So processing means taking that biomass, or that flower, which we call it biomass in the cannabis program, and actually extracting it down to oils. Once we extract it down to oils, we have scientists, so we have chemists, we have engineers who are part of this program. So this ain't something that's done out of a garage. This is a real laboratory.
A big laboratory. Huge.
That actually is using science to be able to extract the oils, to be making medicines that have produced goods. So we can make topicals, we can make edibles, so we can make the brownies and cookies that I was sharing with earlier. We can make butters and oils. We also can make anything from like vape pens and things of that nature. So I've been privileged enough to be able to work with my father over the last 10 years. I was more like 6.5 years in the logistics space. So when you're talking about directly being involved in cannabis, that's how we're directly involved. But when I was working for my father, one of the things that I recognized is that there's pieces of this industry that is not involved in cannabis, and he helped me see very clear when we went to some of the conferences across the country in Vegas, is that there's still no infrastructure that has been built around cannabis. I look at cannabis as the aviation of medicine, because the aviation of medicine allows for us to be able to get involved in something right now that has no 90%. And when I look at the 90%, I look at everything else that's delved around cannabis itself as directly touching it. So when we're talking about touching it from a cultivator perspective, or touching it from a processing perspective, or even the third piece, which I didn't mention before, is the dispensing side. That's what we're used to doing. We're used to the retail and the sale side. So even from an illicit market, because I'm trying to change the terms from black market to illicit, because that's what it really is, we want to be able to say, hey, how do you not take what you're doing from a legal perspective and now make it legal? How do we now sell it and dispense it to patients so patients have the right type of medicine to consume? And those are the 3 tiers that is directly touching. Then you have the 4th one that is more so related to the testing, because one of the things that people don't recognize is it's important to know what you consume. You don't go to a CVS or a Walgreens and get a bottle of aspirin or Tylenol and not look at the back of the pill bottle. You want to know how many milligrams or what's the dosage on your medicine. That's the same thing with cannabis. So when you're buying it from illicit markets, you're buying something that you really don't know what you're consuming. So it's important to understand that from a cannabis perspective, we're trying to regulate things so we have the right information about what's being produced. And that's, again, that science piece. So when you look at the back of your medicine, you're looking at the terpene profile. You're looking at how many cannabinoids are in there. And cannabinoids are the things that's outside of THC. again, the education piece that we can go long and long and long about, but we're not going to do that today for the moment of this time. But those are the things that you need to understand is that I have to go to a testing facility. So I go to buy from a cultivator, I process it, I sell it to the dispensary, but before I sell it to the dispensary, I have to test it. So I have to test it with a third-party testing facility to understand what is being made from this, making sure there's no molds, metals, and things like that inside of the cannabis, because a lot of people don't recognize this is a plant. And a plant that is grown from the ground up. So there's so many things and pesticides that can be involved in the growing of the process. So when you're buying from the streets or anything like that, you could be buying things that are not healthy for your body. So it's important when it comes down to the education is to know what you're consuming. So that's why the program is important. Not because we don't want to have people messing with people's money from the government. It's because we need to be able to regulate things so we know how to utilize it in the best appropriate way. And that's how people can get involved in the direct touching. But the 90% is the ancillary. Those are the pieces that a lot of people forget to realize is because those are the pieces that makes the whole puzzle. You know, so when you have the framework I look at as like the cannabis, or I look at the cannabis as the framework, and everything that we feel inside are the pieces that add to this aviation of medicine. So you're talking about legal. You know, we don't have any really versed lawyers in the cannabis industry that can go from the laws into actually studying cannabis law. From doctors going from physicians to certified recommending doctors to be able to help now recommend medicine to patients, because medicine is an evolving process. We should always be evolving medicine. Then you have marketing, you have distribution, you have logistics. Those are all parts of the industry that if you want to be involved, you can take your skill sets that you have right now and utilize it in an industry that's embarking, that's going to the next phases, that's taking flight, and Dayton is home of that. So one of the things that we know well here is how to create and how to innovate, and cannabis is an innovative medicine.
Yeah, I read that the cannabis industry was a $40 billion industry. So it sounds like it's a lot of room for a lot of people. But one thing that stands out is kind of like the fear that our community has to even go the legal route because of such history. How do you change your mindset? You said educate,
Right.
but I mean, what do you think in changing your mindset with that?
I think anything is about the relationship. I think everything that we do is about the relationship you have with one thing. And cannabis is not something that we're feeding for addictions, because we understand that people say, well, people are lazy, and I know some very high function cannabis users and I know some very people who need cannabis for their well-being. So looking at cannabis not just in how you get involved from the money side, but how do you have the relationship with cannabis by being involved is really understanding what does cannabis mean to you. So of course going through and doing the education piece, but also understanding who's involved in the industry itself. We have a CBD company that's involved doing some great work in the communities, trying to get people to understand just the basic principles about CBD.
Shout out to the CBD.
Yes. New Season Wellness, who's out here, representing cannabis. Having regulated conversations like this, being able to introduce cannabis in uncomfortable spaces, because that's going to be the key to it. Changing some of the laws when it comes down to how people are employed, because there are patients in the program who has to consume. So we're not asking them how many Tylenols did they have today, or having them get drug tests. Now we do know there's appropriateness when it comes down to consumption, and making sure that you understand anything from the understanding of how the relationship you have with you. Now, if you're overusing and things like that, then those are the conversations that you need to have with yourself as far as, am I using this for adult use because I'm just using it, but am I using this for medicine to really regulate my system and regulate my body? And that's the conversations that I'm ready to have with our community and with our people.
Yes, so definitely, I hope everybody in this room kind of leaves, if you all had a stigma about cannabis, without that stigma. Let's all just,
Yeah, because it's not the thing that got your kids in jail. It did based off of the government officials. That's a whole nother topic.
The fake war on drugs.
The war on drugs. We can have a whole nother topic about that. But really, it's about the relationship in our environments, how cannabis is being used. If you can take a plant that you can grow and now make fuel from, and now make plastic from, and now build homes from, what is the harm of this plant? especially when I had to spend millions of dollars to secure it. So there obviously is a benefit from it. It's just now understanding how it benefits us and how we can look at not changing the stigma, because now it's about a personal thing. That's a personal opinion you have with cannabis. If you have a personal opinion with cannabis, then that's you checking yourself.
Yeah, and stop being so judgmental.
You know, if that's you checking yourself, it's like, what is my issue with cannabis, not cannabis with me, especially for those who never consumed. So it's kind of like you have a biasness, you know. You have to be able to say, is it me the problem with cannabis, or is cannabis the problem? And now
It's
we do
you.
have the understanding of, yeah, you know, you want to make sure that what you're consuming, you're not getting anything wrong. So that's why getting into the legal market is important, so you're not getting anything that's laced and things like that, and putting harmful things in your body. So then that, again, changes the relationship, because now if you had a bad experience, you don't want to go back to something that didn't treat you well, you know? So now it's about changing that stigma, understanding how we can properly, with compassion, have conversations with each other about how cannabis can help fuel us to the next stages of our lives.
Yes. Again, I like the piece and what you keep saying about educate. Like during this conversation and doing my research, I learned so much. And even like seeing how even some states are really, like New Jersey, they're starting to create or pass bills that make sure that people of color or minorities, that there are funds set aside, or so people are coming around and really trying to make it an inclusive space. I think it's important for us to demand it and to make sure that this is something that's consistent and taken into a higher level.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that we're facing right now. There's 73 licenses that are about to drop today. I could be looking at my phone when I get off the stage and seeing that 73 license drop. So if you see me sneak away, you know why I snuck away. But 73 licenses in the program has been released over the next week or so. And these 73 licenses is for dispensaries. And dispensaries is important to the medical program because that's where patients have the direct access to, is how they get their medicine. And one of the things is there has been no conversations about social equity and set-asides when it comes down to the 73 licenses that have been dropped, because back in 2017, there has been, let's be honest, this is a new program. As everybody's saying, we're building a plane while we're flying it because it's only been 2 years, 2.5 years that the program has been in place. So there's some challenges that we're still navigating, but there's some growth and increases that's taking place at the same time. Again, there's 3 license types that have been awarded already: cultivating, processing, dispensaries for the first round. Now there's a second round of dispensaries that's about to be released for the medical program, and there's no conversations about how social equity or set-aside has been incorporated for us to be able to have a real place in this industry. So those are the things that now it's about having the awareness and having the conversation. How do we become a part of these 73? Because realistically, out of 73, there's only probably about 15 to 20 people that has the direct access to be able to attain those 73, not to put nobody's dreams down, but to be able to speak some truth to what's taking place. Because prior, there was a clean slate when it came down to the cannabis program, and everybody had a different buy-in. Now that the cannabis program is so regulated, there's a lottery that's taking place. So lottery means anybody can throw their hands in the pile, which is a good thing. But now it's also realistically, like, how much capital do you have? How much resources do you know? How many partners can you really put yourself into to be able to attain one of those 73 licenses? And as disadvantaged or underrepresented communities, a lot of people don't have the same advantages to be able to move those balls along. So we're really having the conversation now on how we can be more inclusive in the space, because we want to be able to participate. We want to be able to have ways for us to say, there's somebody here that looks like me. There's somebody here that's representing everyone and not just one body, which is important because all bodies are part of this whole walk, is important to this well-being of this plant.
So how do you advocate for laws to change? Just going to your local politician, lobbying, things of that nature? Is there anything else you would add to that?
Making sure that we understand the laws that are being written is really important to understand the local government, making sure that we have the right representations in our local communities to be able to say what is happening with cannabis today, because it's important that cannabis is being looked at in so many different phases, because we're a functioning, operating company in the industry. So, you know, there's taxes that has to be done. There's other business things that we need to be able to make sure that we have conversations about when it comes down to our position and how we see true to the value of us being here as an industry as well. So having conversations with our local government, having conversations with different lobby groups, different advocates that's in the industry, so we can really start standing in solidarity and creating a compromise that we can collectively all say that we agree to. And those are some of the starting points. You know, everything has a start. It's just being able to understand where we're starting at so we can have a place to say what we need. Because if we don't have a pathway that we're creating, then there's no place for anybody else in the future. So having minority-owned companies that are currently standing here and giving out the details like this information today is important to be able to have those conversations. So when people are looking at investing, we're looking at it from a smart way, saying, okay, where do you want to be at in cannabis? You know, do you want to directly touch the plant? Do you want to evolve from the ancillary sides? And if you can't touch the plant now, how do you get involved now so you can have something versus nothing?
That marketing job sounds good to me. So if Nora Labs
What's the biz? Hello.
Yeah, I like that. So I guess my question is, what's next for Nora Labs, you know?
There's a lot of things that Neuro Labs is involved with. What's next for us is connecting with our community so people understand that we're here. One of the pieces of our mission is connection, integrity, and accountability. We're looking at making sure that we are staying true to who we are by the work that we do and how we do our work. We just recently had a beautiful event that I worked with one of my business partners on in Cleveland called Midwest Cannabis that allowed for us to celebrate minorities that are in the actual cannabis industry and welcome everybody to become a part of this conversation because diversity and inclusion is key. And we want to be able to highlight the moments that are key for everything. So next thing for Nora is we are still working together to build collective funding. We are still working together to make sure that we have licenses so we can continue to create the policies that's important for us to move the pathway along.
Okay, cool. Audrey, what's up? Is it time for questions? Okay,
Got a
cool.
few minutes. We can talk a little
Right, Gina. I think that's cool, especially I would call it a festival that you guys had in Cleveland. Like, I thought that was cool, just being out there celebrating and educating the community
had
about
vendors,
cannabis.
had sponsors, had a lot of different people coming together to build something in the industry that we want to move forward with. So it was a really great turnout. And then also, too, now that we're here, we're going to be doing a lot of things in the Dayton area to be able to make sure that our voice is heard when it comes down to being represented in the community, making sure that people understand about cannabis awareness and patient awareness, because again, this plant is for patient well-being as well, and that's the most important thing that we want to highlight is that, you know, patients need to have medicine that's going to fit their pockets, meaning that it could be affordable for them to be able to purchase products in the program, for them to be able to have a variety of products that they can buy from a variety of people. Being able to make sure that we understand the research and the science, because the science is what's going to really evolve us as we continue to grow in this space.
Yes, amen. All right, cool. So if you don't have anything else, Audrey, we can take it to you for questions.
Oh, no. Shout out to my team, Neuro Labs, here in the building.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies. How are you?
Excellent.
Good. You were speaking about the fact that it is still a very large challenge of federal funding due to it being illegal. What advice would you have for other folks who are entering into the cannabis industry, looking for investors, and trying to pitch to them, saying, hey, I need your help, but we still can't go the traditional route of banking and loans, so we don't have that traditional, trust that most companies ensure with traditional banking?
I believe the best bet is to have a collective buy-in. You know, people who already have a position in the space, you are better off to buy in there versus not getting in anywhere, because that's the pathway that's going to help position you into the next space. Because it being so highly regulated, it's not like a liquor license. It's a little bit different because liquor license is federally legal. We're still talking about a federally legal drug. So making sure investors understand that you got about a good year before the banking does open. So if you want to be able to be in now where you can be able to have some equity, being in part of Tesla before Tesla was Tesla, being a part of Google before Google was Google, that's where you're coming in on the bottom level at here by investing in businesses like myself and the other companies that are in the market, because that's the market that's starting from ground up. That's not something that you're waiting for to get on the public NASDAQ and going over in Canada and saying, yeah, let me get into this company, which is great because it's still an emerging market and it's still stocks that needs to be done. But as an investor, when you come into these new markets like Ohio and other markets, the big buy-in is buying into limited license states that doesn't have a recreation or adult use program yet, because that's where most of the money is being generated to be able to build the infrastructure of the cannabis industry. So Ohio is about 2 years in. There's other markets going live, but it's really about knowing who's there so you can partner up with them to be able to continue to expand your network. Thank you, Gina.
Hi, I had a question. First of all, I want to thank you, young ladies, for representing well. I humble myself to say I'm grateful.
Thank you.
The other question I have, it goes to, because everything is governed by laws and policy, how instrumental is local politicians champion cannabis in the Montgomery County, Dayton area? And the reason why I say that, because of our high population of African Americans and people of color and those who have been incarcerated under that auspices of war on drugs and use of cannabis, how important it is not only for them to support it, but to educate the others, and what will be the ramifications? So it's a two-part question: the importance, and then what's the ramification of them not supporting that?
Wow. Let me see. So, again, a lot of the things that I recognize by being in this program is the lack of education with even our political dignitaries. Just because it's new for everybody in the state of Ohio and people are looking for outside research from other license holders in other states that are going legal to be able to get that information, that insight. When it comes down to local governments and governing bodies, we're still having that conversation of how to bring everybody to the table. And that's what we're charging, because it's a conversation that is important, not only from the capital perspective, because again, we understand that it's generating enough income to be able to grow the industry, but also what are we doing about the people who have been highly incarcerated? What are we doing about making sure that ownership is in underrepresented communities? Because if we have people who are coming into the space and investing like ourselves, and we don't have a place to be able to play in the game later, then that's not a benefit that's to us. That's just only benefit to one group of people. And we need to be able to have a collective conversation of how we can circulate in our economy with the right policies, with the right progression moving forward. And if it doesn't, then you don't get voted in. You know, that's just kind of the bottom line, just because at the same time, it's important for us to hold our people, just like ourselves, integrity and accountability accountable for the businesses that are involved, for people who are involved in the businesses, because we're employing people. So having the conversation about employment is important. We're working with government bodies who are organizing to this date. So being able to have those conversations of how do we now buy in together? How do we stand in solidarity so when these issues of cannabis come up, it's not a foreign thing. It's something that we can all feel comfortable to talk about.
Yeah, say no to corporate drug tests.
Right, exactly. You know, I mean, those are some of the starting points, you know, that we can get to, because if we don't change those things, then it's going to prevent us to be involved in it later. Thank you for the question. Hello.
Hello there. Quick question for you. How do you see Neuro Labs playing a part in the opioid epidemic in Dayton, Ohio?
Well, you know, it's about, again, thank you for your question. How we see medicine is in pill form. And one of the things is, you know, holistic medicine is something that takes a little more time to regulate. So it's not a fast thing that you have to be a part, that is going to take time to evolve into. So people who are traditionally used to having a lot of prescription drugs, and especially when it comes to opiates, are used to the addiction of being on something consistent. So it's about being able to understand that medicine is not bad and pharmaceuticals aren't bad, but it's about the the relationship it has to your health. Again, that conversation about relationship. And now how do you transition that relationship into another evolving part? Because again, medicine is so important to our future, and holistic medicine is something that now we're starting to have more viable and more informed conversations about. So now people aren't relying on opiates as the only way to be able to know that their pain or their symptoms of what their ailment is being released through whether it's opioids or any other pharmaceuticals, that cannabis has enough properties in itself to be able to counteract and do the same things that an opiate can. And it's just about utilizing the research, having the right, again, education that's supporting the facts. Again, my mom says somatics to science, going from the science side and really focusing in on the science side and being able to be open enough to know that, hey, let's talk to our doctors, because they're held accountable too for being able to be in a practice. A practice is always evolving. So how do you start practicing and coming into a program that is traditionally you're not used to and say, we can give cannabis a try, give it a try, and we're not going to remove you completely, but let's see how it evolves in your process, so then we can make medicine that speaks to that. So we're making, looking at launching products that are in pill form, products that are in mint forms, products that are Nikki, help me out, our elder group. Geriatrics, thank you, my bad, no disrespect. Our geriatrics group can actually have the viability, so they're not just feeling like, okay, yeah, I used to do this back in my heyday, but I have nothing to do, because medicine is different now. It's a lot more potent. It looks a little cracky sometimes, not, excuse my language, because you got things that are in crystal forms and you're using a dab rig. Like, ain't nobody all going to get involved in that process, but it is still a part of the cannabis industry. So there's medicines that's evolving now. So having drinks and edibles and tinctures are the ways that we can introduce it slowly. So then when you get involved and you have that comfortable relationship with cannabis, you can know how to use it in other methods.
One thing I wanted to say really quickly, I'm so sorry, but going back to the legal question, talking about just the history, I think it's also important for everyone in this room, especially myself, to know or be reminded that the cannabis industry is growing, but yet there are still so many people incarcerated and in jail or prison because of these laws. And so we just need that to catch up with and these people to be released for something that's so illegal. So I didn't want to continue to keep talking about this without acknowledging that and the injustices that's still occurring to this day.
It's a big part of our conversations to this date. That's the main reason why we're here creating this pathway, so we can usher in the opportunities for those who have been affected, not just those who've been directly affected, but the families of those who've been affected, because the family is what continues that history on. So if they've been affected, we need to figure out ways to remove or to transition that trauma and to invite the ways we could thrive through cannabis versus the ways we were destroyed by it.
So advocating not just for the use and the stigma to be dropped from cannabis, but for families to be released and all of that in that space.
Yep. Mental health is a big piece, and our mental health is important, especially when it comes down to how we see our environments and the impact of our environment. We have PTSD from COVID. We have PTSD from them tornadoes. Like, let's be honest. And cannabis is one of the things that can help with that. That's one of the elements that is one of the 25 conditions on the actual program. So if we have the relationship again, and we can get past the traumas and the stigmas, we can be able to really have real conversations about this plant.
Thank you so much for your responses. I am torn on this issue, and let me just state that I was really, really concerned about the decriminalization. That's big for me, because there are a lot of young men's and women's lives who've been destroyed by that. So that's very important to me, but it also important to me is that, tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, can stay in your system for 30 days. And if it's not legal, then people could lose their jobs that way. There's another side of the trauma. In addition to that, marijuana has been known for decades as a gateway drug, specifically for those folks who don't know that they are genetically predispositioned to addiction. So it is really your guys' job to take away not only the stigma, but the trauma that comes from people trying it and they don't know that they could become an addict because they are genetically predisposed. It may be generational, it may not have even been exposed in their family. But having studied this and working on campaigns to rid opioids in our community, I've seen too many times that marijuana and alcohol were the gateways.
Well, again, it's about changing the way we say it. So again, changing from marijuana to cannabis, because again, cannabis is the encompassing. There's been a lot of propaganda and a lot of ways that we have utilized this drug to misplace and to utilize it as a way to incarcerate and to jeopardize the well-being of our communities. There has been a lot of studies about the gateway piece, and that's something that I encourage you to look into some more research when it comes down to how cannabis affects our bodies from an endocannabinoid system. There's a lot of science and things that are still being discussed right now to this date, and it's just really about what is facts and what is fiction with cannabis, because there's a lot of things that people are misreading and misusing when it comes down to the use of cannabis, and it is my job to be able to be here to educate that, because again, that's changing the stigma of our mindsets and how it's being used versus to the truth of how it's being used. And that's where we want to be able to focus our attention on, is the facts, not our misconceptions of the fact, which we can overall evolve once we have the conversations. Until we sit down and have conversations like the ones we're having today, we can't get past the fact of where we're trying to use cannabis and to be able to move the medicine along in the future.
Maybe try some of the rooms in Narcotics Anonymous. Why don't you try talking to some of the addicts who are recovering? Maybe they'll be able to share their experience, strength, and hope with you.
For sure, for sure. We'd love to be able to open up that conversation with anybody who has had effects with cannabis that has not been a positive thing. Because there's a lot of things in our world that has affected us, and we all have been addicts to something. So we're trying to figure out the ways to have the proper conversations with people. And if it's a problem with the addiction avenue, then let's get the right scientists, get the right doctors involved to be able to have that conversation about what kind of cannabis were you using? Were you using a legal cannabis product in the program? Were you using it from an understanding of an emotional intelligence? Were you using it from an educational, from a health perspective? There's a lot of different components of the sides of the story that we need to be able to have a conversation about to understand where's the addiction coming from. So I think it's really about just sitting together and having a conversation.
Hello
Thank you for your
again.
question. I appreciate it.
Just to follow up with my original question, the reason why I asked about NeuroLab's role with opioid addiction is because I know there are several white papers and studies out there that show that cannabis can be used to help with people with addictions.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to point that out, and I didn't know if you wanted to speak on that as well.
There's a lot of information and education out about cannabis to this date, but we still got a lot of research to do. It's important for, again, these conversations to evolve and not stop here, because the stopping of it here doesn't allow for us to really have impactful conversation that helps us understand cannabis and all. Again, cannabis is not just a THC thing, because the THC piece is what people find themselves addicted to. It's the high. It's a psycho-hallucinogen that people are saying, okay, I got to get very 30% potent THC, but there's non-psychoactive THC that's non-addictive that helps with your endocannabinoid system. And that's a system that is in all of our bodies. It's inside of mother's breast milk. It's inside of the things that we actually use every day. So now it's important to say, what type of medicine am I using with cannabis? Am I using a CBD that has a CBG or a THCA that is non-psychoactive, or am I just using it for the psychoactive perspective that is a counterpart that helps fuse some of the next phases of our cannabis growth? So, thank you.
Time for one more.
I heard you earlier talking about expunging records as well as testing. Some people may have that stigma, since I've been arrested or have a conviction, is no chance for me. Is there a place we can go to maybe get rid of that, or get that expungement, or
Absolutely.
Just
I've been working with Tasha Roundtree, who decriminalized Montgomery County. She decriminalized Dayton, Ohio, and she also has expunged over 600 records. So we went to an expungement clinic that was at Mount Enon about a month and a half ago. Over 200 people came. So we can collectively help expunge records and also reinstate them with their driver's license, reinstate them with housing and utilities assistance, because that's the fresh start. That's the work that we're working on towards our ground up approach, is to make sure that people like yourselves have the availability to be able to have a different type of conversation with cannabis, because we know cannabis has been so impactful on underrepresented communities, especially the Black and brown community. So we want to make sure that we have conversations with yourself so it doesn't continue to hinder you, but it evolves you now, because now you can do the first step is now get the expungement. Now there's things on the expungement piece that still has to be discussed about what type of expungements, et cetera, but at least that's a start that we're already currently working and engaged with in the community that we can help get you involved in.
I'm just thinking some people will say, since I have a conviction, there's no hope for me or something like that, but you're telling me there is.
Absolutely, there's
way.
hope. There's always a way.
All right.
And I'll definitely get your contact information. I have quite a few people on our team here that we can make sure we get your information to help assist you with the conversation.
Hi. Hi.
Hello.
First, I just want to say thank you for all your information. Thank you for your efforts, your investment of your family.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful presence, and it resonates not only a sense of wisdom, but also a solidarity.
Thank you.
It's appreciated. I'm the CEO of Loxygen CBD. I have a very strong interest in topics such as addiction. Specifically, we have a product that deals with, it's a cigarette alternative, it's a tobacco alternative, because few people necessarily don't take into account the addiction that's involved with the tobacco product itself. Many people want to, quit the tobacco product, don't have the ability because there's a substance called nicotine that's
Exactly.
actually
With the backwood that
Yes.
could be addictive.
very addictive, very addictive.
And that's another education piece.
Yes.
If you're using backwoods, or if you're using
Right.
tobacco as a way to roll your cannabis up in, which is
Precisely.
illegal in the state of Ohio, that you're supposed to be using
Sure.
non-combustion products. But to your point,
Yes.
the addiction can come in the tobacco
Precisely.
that's added to your cannabis.
It absolutely is. It compounds. And, I think to myself as well, if we think of another addictive substance, sugar.
Sugar.
We don't hear too much about, criminalizing sugar, but,
Thank you.
that's considered an option. We deal with a particular tobacco alternative called the hemp stick, and we fuse a Kush blend that specifically has terpenes that are to give a calm, enhancement, because we find a lot of people oftentimes do want to, have that oral fixation, and as well as, without the intoxicating factor, they would like to be able to, utilize that habit and slowly curb themselves off of it. And so I really wanted to, if I may ask, to speak to the idea of CBDs. And I've had a lot of questioning in regard to, many people are interested, especially elders, for inflammation and things of that nature. However, they're very concerned about the intoxicating effects and or the lack of, because oftentimes people without this, i.e. stimulating effect, they don't feel as if they're being healed, and there's a lot of acute, preoccupation, in certain circles with having an immediate, turnover and effect. Our particular motto at Loxygen is to enhance your calm and surpass your beauty. And
Absolutely.
so I would love for you to speak to that, please. Thank you.
Yes. So the CBD, is that, because I just want to make sure I understood your question, the CBD piece. Say your question one more time at the end. Absolutely. Yep. So CBD, in comparison, there's just so many different cannabinoids. So our body has an endocannabinoid system that focuses on your CB1 and CB2 receptors. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to go back into the details, but we have doctors or CTR certified to recommend people who can speak to you, and we have scientists who can go into the very intricate details of the cannabinoids. I'm not at that study yet, but I'm getting there. But CBD is one of the cannabinoids that is an effect of the whole cannabinoid system. So your THC is a more hallucinogen perspective, meaning that in the state program, if you're a hemp company or a CBD company, you have to have less than 0.03% of THC in your medicine to make it a CBD-derived plant. Now, when you have different ratios that you see people have like a 1-to-1, et cetera, that means that they're counteracting the CBD with another cannabinoid, which most likely is THC. And THC is that psychoactive piece that enacts the CBD to be able to attach to your receptors for your headspace. So your CB1 is the one that affects your whole body, and CB2, I believe, is the one that affects your head. But I want to make sure I get you the proper information on CB1, CB2, the endocannabinoid system. But as far as CBD is concerned, CBD is a cannabinoid that is in so many different varieties of cannabis plants. And it has a lot to do with the more so non-psychoactive profiles when it comes like CBG, things like that, CBN, that affects with inflammation. It can stimulate, like you said, give you the calm. Sometimes people, when they get too elevated, I'm trying to, again, change words, so set too high, too elevated, or, over-consumed, that people will counteract their medicine with CBD because it breaks down that THC barrier to be able to have you more steady. Okay, hope that answered the question, but I appreciate you taking the time, and I would love to share with you more information on what we're doing, for sure. Uh-oh. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Nicole.
I
Thank
know,
you,
I'm sorry, we're out of
Te'Jal.
time. Thank you, Te'Jal, for the wonderful questions.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you.